We always love to get some time with TV personality, writer, now Emmy Award winner. My goodness, Doug, you do so many things. By the way, you did play baseball for a part of your life too, Philadelphia. Doug Glanville, thank you for joining us, and thanks for always giving us a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's great to be on the Hardest Sport. It's always a pleasure. Deep thought, perspective, guardians of the game. So yeah, it's a thrill to be here, man.
Well, I might have to just clip that right there and say, we're done. That's it. Thanks for the
Jason's done for the day.
I'm done for the day. Let's get to it. This must be a special time of year for you. Baseball is underway. I know you don't go out there and throw the uniform on every day, but how much do you love this time of year?
Oh, I love it. And not only just that it's become part of my soul, you grow up and you know that feeling. The spring comes along, and growing up in New Jersey, I had the 4 seasons. So winter, I was inside playing Stratomatic or something with my brother. And then all of a sudden, that those birds start chirping, and it just makes sense. Baseball is around the corner, and I love, checking out spring training. And back then, looking in the paper, you'd see like a little line score, and it was like exciting. Wow, the Phillies played the Twins, So, but slowly, year after year, as a fan, that transition to being, a player in college and a professional, and I never lost that feeling. And to this day, years outside of playing the game, I hear the birds, I smell the air. I'm just like spring. It's like that feeling of rebirth, and baseball is exactly what I expect at this time, because it's what I love. So I'm thrilled. And the lockout, all those things, I was like, all right, we got to get this going. Right? So, but I'm busy. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and so much of it revolves around baseball.
And you're still watching the games. I was following your Twitter feed the other night. We had a situation here in Philly. One of our young players, Alec Boehm, had 3 errors and mouthed some words that he regretted afterwards, but he owned up to it. And he stood there and he took it. He didn't deny it. And I saw you tweet that after the Philly fans gave him a standing ovation coming up next, you always found the Philly fans to be straightforward. They care. If you treat the fans with respect and play hard every day, they'll let you know when you fall short, but also let you know when you stand tall. Tell me what that watching that situation with Alec Boehm was as a microcosm for you as somebody who played in this city for these fans.
Well, I saw an opportunity, and I think it turned out fairly well. But here's a fairly young player, who is learning to navigate the professional life, not just Philadelphia, but this reality that when you play every day, you have to respond and answer to the questions and the media and your coach, and there's a whole level of accountability that can be very new, especially when you get to the big leagues fairly quickly. I took a long time. I was a first round draft pick. And I started learning about this when I was in college, because just getting recruited or scouts or all that, navigating all that was challenging, because I just remember being 20 years old and like, wow, people are writing about me and they've never spoken to me before. That was like mind blowing back then. Now, obviously today it's different with social media, but you still have that, give and take. And, there would be cities like New York or Philly or Boston that had, much more of a robust media presence. Then we'd go to Montreal back in the day, and there'd be one reporter, and it was a whole different mindset. You were almost like, wait a minute, are we invisible? So I think it's a very good, if I'm in the PR department or the community relations in the Phillies right now, I'm clipping off that experience of Alex and finding a way to use that as teaching moments about, fans and embracing, because I had a great time in Philly. I mean, I wish we won more, certainly, but I mean, it was like, I didn't come at the right time or whatever it was, but I also recognized that I was a Philly fan growing up. So I know what it is to actually be a Philly fan. So I know the feelings, and find they were great in the 70s and 1980, of course. So playing for me was just like, hey, it was just a transition from being a fan, just being a fan in uniform. So I understand that, playing hard. And I had a lot of mentors growing up, like coming up in the system, Sean Dunston, guys who played hard. And I started to realize, like, there's no excuse. I mean, there's no excuse. You could, have all the talent in the world, but if you don't embrace that and figure out that, these things are, as Sean Dunston said, it doesn't cost anything to hustle, right? It's free. So I think that's important. And the sooner you learn that, the better you are at kind of figuring out how to embrace it in a way because Philly fans, they know their stuff. They're coming from a place of knowledge. I mean, I remember a fan heckling me about my thesis and senior thesis from college and I think we talked about this last time, but I'm gonna repeat it again. So I'm replacing Lenny Dykstra, who's a legend, nails and whatever all that. And I'm the Philly guy. I went to college there, New Jersey, Philly fan, but I was terrible in the first month of the season, right? So someone did the research and found out that I did a paper on building a stadium at 30th Street Station for my senior design project at Penn. And so some fan figured it out. And when I was hitting, 180, I heard in the outfield some guy yelling, "Hey, Glanville, why don't you build a stadium you can hit in?" And so I was like, okay, that's actually really good. You just got to embrace it. You're going to get called out. But if, you play with your heart on your sleeve, you play hard, everybody's cool, I mean, and I had a cool relationship. And look, they booed me when I misread the ball on Eric Milton's possible no-hitter. And it was terrible. I felt bad. I got booed. I got cheered when I got knocked on my back on a pitch at my head during a bunt. And I got the bunt down and we won the game and they were on me. But, it was like forgotten tomorrow. I felt bad and it bothered me for sure. But I also knew yeah, I did mess that play up. It's you got to be fair, and I think they to me raise the bar and make you accountable, but also I gotta play my A game every day, and if you do that, you'll have a good relationship with them.
You mentioned Sean Dunston. How important is it for a young player to have mentors, not only to learn how to play the game right, but how to deal with the media and how to deal with all the things that come with being a professional?
Critical. I mean, that's just one word that comes to mind. I can't imagine navigating any of this without mentors and players that care and are older and experienced and kind of want to take the time to do what is sort of traditional in baseball, is that be part of the mentorship. And I had plenty of guys like that, and sometimes unexpected places. And one direct example with Chase Utley was Mike Morgan, who's a longtime pitcher for a lot of teams, was at the Cubs. And I had a great spring training, but I had options left and they sent me down. And I was upset, but I was like, okay, I'm going to do my work in AAA. And Morgan pulled me aside and said, look, we saw you play. We know you're a big leaguer. You'll be here in no time. Just do the same thing, work hard, and you'll be right back here. And that's what Morgan said. Now, that's not a guy I talk to every day, but it comes from anywhere. And then years later, when Chase Utley didn't make the team, I said the exact same thing to him, and just saying, look, I'm now the 25th man on the roster now, and my time is limited. I hope to play longer, but you're going to have this spot soon, and just do what you're doing, So, you just pass it on. And sometimes, Susie, sometimes when it's hard, family, all the things you're going through, it's great to have someone to talk to that's been there and knows that experience. And from there, it just makes it a lot easier. And you gain a perspective that really helps you have longevity in the game.
You mentioned mentors and trailblazers. The reason we wanted to have you on this time, obviously, we'll talk anything with you anytime. It's Jackie Robinson Day. And you are a man who has been linked to him through the work you've been able to do. Last year, we saw you as the narrator of a 30-minute special. We are all Jackie, looking at the impact that he had. I was struck in the trailer. You started by saying, what do you think when you hear the name Jackie Robinson? And you left it to people to decide. We wanted to start by posing that question to you. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've asked that question. I'm doing the UCLA Stanford game on Friday where he went to college. And I asked some of the young players that, and I like their answers, but I think of change. I think of impact. I think of equality. I think of passion. And you talk about mentorship, for sure, just setting this tone, pioneer, innovator, and I mean, just relentless. And so I guess my context has evolved as well, because now, as a father, husband, and then getting to know the family, I started to see this other side about, Sharon Robinson, his daughter, who I've become friends with over the years, and just seeing that, he had this other component to his life that's become more and more open about being a family man and just really doing what he did. And he struggled at times because he had to go out to these places, and he felt compelled to be involved, not just when he was playing, but even more so afterwards. So he traveled a lot, and he was chair of the NAACP, and he was on the board. He did all these things that took a lot of time away from his family, his own family. But he also saw the community, the world, as part of his family. And he wanted that family to love each other, to respect each other, and to embrace equality. And that's what I love about baseball, or sports in general, baseball in particular, is that, you have this everyday experience in baseball, and you're always reinforcing the importance of teamwork. Every day, you have a bad day, but you have to figure it out every single day as a team from all over the world. These players are coming from. That's a beautiful thing. And this tapestry also has to come together and uphold the rules of the game, which is really to the foundation. If you think of Jackie Robinson, if it's really fair and you want to have a game that's of integrity, you have to apply those rules across the board evenly to everybody. And that's a pretty good lesson for larger society. Like, I don't care where you're coming from, here are the rules, and we got to preserve this. And so Jackie sustains for me in so many ways, because I watched my daughter steal all these bases in Little League a few years ago, and it's because we saw 42, and she's like, yeah, that, I'm Jackie Robinson, like that's who I'm. She wasn't imitating me, like she's, I was like all old dinosaur retired guy, so she was like, Jackie's bouncing around. So
she does realize you're younger than him, right?
Yeah, I don't know if she Jackie's still around as far as she's concerned. So yeah, he's but yeah, there's no one word. There is one word, but there's so many of them, which showed how versatile he was.
How important is it that baseball honor Jackie Robinson and what he went through, the whole experience? Because we talked to Keyshawn Johnson a couple of months ago about the struggle with the NFL and not recognizing pioneers in their league the way that Major League Baseball is. How important is it to you and to the league and to society to recognize Jackie Robinson and not just let it go away?
Oh, extremely important, extremely. And partly because, when you talk about pioneer, when he integrated baseball, this was before the military. This was the first real major American institution that integrated. And he was blazing a trail on so many levels. But because he was such a transcendent figure, this spilled into everything in our world. And it was a time where baseball really became a proxy for American wish and hope. Like this idea that, we have tenets that we're trying to live up to, and we the people, and and he became a real tangible, real life example through our national pastime. And so, it's a great American story, one of the greatest American stories, about someone who still believed, no matter fighting, going through all the things, he said, no, there's a better day here. There's a future here. And we have to live up to these things. And yes, I'm going through all these things, but I'm looking ahead. And that's something, that you gain from so many people who haven't had freedoms. That's why we learn so much from people that don't have the privilege to be able to be free, because you start to see like, wow, these are people willing to die, fight, whatever it takes, because it's that important. And so Robinson didn't let us take it for granted as a man of color and all the experiences he went through. So that example should be part of everything. It's because it really sums up American spirit, whether revolutionary wars, all the things we've done to fight for independence. And he became this microcosm of it. And I learned when I covered the game in Cuba in, I think it was 2016, and President Obama brought the Robinson family, well, at least the daughter and Rachel. So Sharon and Rachel came on Air Force One to Cuba. And I asked them, like, well, why did you do that? And Robinson had spring training in Havana, Cuba. That was in 1947, the year he broke in. And it was a nightmare for the Dodgers with black players in Florida the year before. So they were like, and Cuba, they were cooler with this whole racial dynamic, certainly more so than the US was at the time. And Robinson, and did this whole experience with Havana. And so I got to sit down with Rachel Robinson and talk about this legacy. So I found out then he was an international color line, this Panamanian who we played exhibition games, and Cuba, they were all like watching to see what was going to happen to Jackie Robinson in America. And it opened up the door for, when he crossed the really true color line, really color wall, and changed America's thinking. So I just think his story is, the challenge is sustainability, right? And for me, it's going to the young people. Just like we talked about mentorship, you got to keep passing that on and reinvent it in different ways to resonate with that generation, social media and all these, and then they'll own it because it's really appealing. I mean, I interviewed 3 players at UCLA for getting ready for the game, 2 of which are Eric Karros's sons. And the other player, they all said the same thing. They did a project on Jackie in 2nd and 4th grade. And they all did it. And they saw themselves as Jackie Robinson, black, white, whatever. They just saw that. And that relatability to me is what will keep him and his story enduring.
Yeah, to that end, I've seen, the movie 42 is something that you see teenagers of this generation relate to. And so continuing to find different ways to tell that story is so important, because I remember sitting there with my young son after the game, and he was kind of shaken by the movie. And as a Philadelphian, he was a little disturbed by it, because we all know the history of what happened when he came to Philadelphia. But are there different ways now that we can keep it fresh, in addition to just doing Jackie Robinson Day?
Absolutely. Baseball as a sport, has to weigh that, but there's so many historians. There's a new book out called True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. There's so many ways to revisit it. And to some degree, your future does hinge on the reinterpretation of the past. Every generation has the power to look back and figure out, all right, what are we learning from this history? But also go back and look at it differently, because there's so many stones we didn't turn over. And to your point about, there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that, when you want to make someone more palatable, or you kind of strip away some of the things because it's uncomfortable, whether it's Ben Chapman in Philly. But just to give you a direct example, my great aunts and uncles on my mom's side, they ultimately their great migration was to Philadelphia, and they lived in the north side, North Philly. And so when growing up and visiting them, we were in Philly, and I was a Philly fan. And I didn't learn until I got traded to Philly and was a starter that my family in North Philly, they loved the Phillies until Ben Chapman, they were like, Jackie, Jackie, Jackie. And then they saw this happen, and they saw how Philly waited 10 years to get the first black player, and they were completely turned off. And they still love baseball because Jackie and the pioneers that came after him, but they just didn't want any part of it. And so fast forward to 1997, when I got traded to the Phillies, and my Aunt Tank, that was her nickname, 1998, starting lineup, she's like, okay, now I'm going to come back. It took that long. And I think we underestimate the pain because it's uncomfortable. So we want to move it over. Then people just suffer because they don't share that story. And Philly, to their credit as a city, apologized to Jackie. That's important because that's restorative. So we can't underestimate that when we try to make it safe and comfortable, we kind of lose, you're trading something valuable, not only the lessons, but people who've actually been through it that are still open to forgiveness, that are still open because they love the game so much. They love Jackie Robinson's contribution so much, and they know it's not easy and not supposed to be easy. So that is the gift that he can keep giving. And to me, it's just reinventing and retelling his story.
Well, and also Jackie's openness to that forgiveness, because he was not stopped by the treatment that he had. He may have been offended by it, upset by it, but it did not stop him from going. And I wish we could have seen him in this time, because I saw you say that Jackie was a prolific letter writer to start, but he really was viral before there was viral, even just with traditional media outlets. I'm wondering what Jackie Robinson in the age of social media would have been like, using the platforms that he could have at his fingertips to really drive a message that he was able to drive when there wasn't all of these avenues.
He would have been relentless on social media. I mean, he really would have been tweeting every 5 seconds, calling stuff out. And, so talk about the letters. There's a book called First Class Citizenship, and it's typed letters just reprinted And this man wrote everybody. I mean, it's very much like Alexander Hamilton for Hamilton fan. Like I wrote my way out. Like he wrote, and he wrote letters to presidential candidates, and he called people out. Malcolm X, he called out Martin Luther King. He was just like, look, you got to be about this equality, and we can't ever let off this accelerator. So he did this. And, one letter to Dwight Eisenhower, he said, I have been more aggressive since I stopped playing baseball. So you can imagine, you watch him on the base path. Can you imagine? But it was true. He was marching in the streets, taking everybody on. Gerald Ford, Nixon, JFK. I mean, he just never stopped. And so what he was able to accomplish by, he passed in his 50s is unbelievable in that short period of time. And to the point where you integrated schools years later, civil rights movement, they were looking to Jackie's inspiration from the 40s, because that's how long and how much he inspired that generation. Remember, Martin Luther King Jr. was 18 when Jackie Robinson broke into the big leagues. He was a junior, by the way, he was a junior at 18 in college, but 18 years old. So he was a mentor. And so Robinson would be in everybody's face. Now, the politics of today would probably make it, all the things like, I'm sure he would have supported Colin Kaepernick, for example, because he said openly back in the day that he was upset at the flag. He was upset at the symbolism when you're not living up to the tenets of great American hope. So he called that out too. So how would that have been taken? Probably the way it was taken today. It would be kind of divisive in some ways. But he was always consistent that it was about equality. And it wasn't just for Black people, it was for everyone. He wanted everyone to enjoy the equal treatment under the umbrella of America. And therefore that message was really universal. And he shunned the idea that I'm just trying to do this for some superior stance. I wanted to elevate everyone in this common shared humanity. And he was consistent.
And it wasn't just in baseball. I mean, you did a recent video where you did commentary about when him stealing home in the World Series. And one of the things that you pointed out was the other things that he did. It wasn't just about baseball. It was what he did off the diamond, that he was a pioneer as the first Black vice president of a major American corporation and of a bank in Harlem, and the first Black nationally syndicated columnist. What does that mean as somebody that's a writer like you? What does it mean for him to have pioneered in other areas, and what does it mean to society?
Never just stick to sports. And I mean, because when you see the power of sport and how it can transcend and not only and amplify the message of equality and hope and fairness and equity and things that Jackie Robinson stood for and fought for, then you see that it doesn't matter. Baseball is just sort of it's like a platform, but it leads to all these other possibilities. It's an example of American resourcefulness and business and care and community, but that exists everywhere. And that you can kind of photocopy those lessons from sport and move it right to something else. And he did just that. He didn't stop. He kept the same message over and over, how he approached the game. That's how he approached, everything else when he was fighting for equality. I think of, Sharon Robinson, I'm going to paraphrase, but I wrote an ESPN.com article that's coming out in a couple of days. And I take verbatim the back cover of one of her books, Stealing Home, about family. And in a nutshell, it talks about how when she was a kid, they would ice skate on a pond on their property. And they had to determine if it was frozen or not. And the man that went out there to test that was Jackie Robinson. I think he brought a broomstick out there to go down the line. And it would do too loose. He'd back up and he'd go back out. And then he'd say, go get your skates. And that's what he would do every winter. But here's the rub. The man couldn't swim. And so Sharon writes this beautifully because she's like, that's exactly what he did for America. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what he was going to fall through the ice or get shot or whatever's going to happen, but he did it anyway. And he believed that he kept going and he'd back off if he needed to. And eventually that pond was frozen and he walked right into the Hall of Fame. But then he didn't stop there, because once it was frozen, he was trying to get ponds for everybody. And that's, Jackie Robinson just, was very much about that for a better America. And for those reasons, as we care about our country and our, and its tenets, I think it will continue that way. We just got to keep telling the story.
You've talked about ponds for everybody. I did want to close on something that's a little more than baseball. We've talked to Jesse Washington about this, Brian Flores in the NFL, with what he's done, not taking the settlement so that he had to sign an NDA and really taking on the hiring practices. He now has additional coaches joining him. As I joked with Jesse, it looks like they picked the wrong man who has lots of receipts. Can you talk about, through the eyes of Jackie Robinson, what he did, how you think Brian Flores and what he's doing through the court system may be able to bring about some positive change, not only on the field, but throughout society?
Yeah, I mean that, and baseball is not, take a Jackie, you think about collective bargaining. There's so many pioneering moments through those negotiations that benefited larger employment, like, defined benefits, or so many things that the Players Association in labor dispute have come up with, things that benefit employment. I think it's the same idea that, Jackie, so many people relate to his story, or many other pioneers in different industries, to inspire them to take on something, to be like, you know what, this is hard, but Jackie had it harder, or many others have it harder. And there's many still trying to break through these doors and ceilings. And so Flores, once again, can set precedent, can really lay it down and make people think about this in a way that would bring it to question anyone who cares about fairness, and just sees that, like, these are former players, these are people who care about the game. They were maybe beloved when they played, and they're knowledgeable, clearly, and they just need fair opportunity. And everybody can relate to that, just wanting to be respected, wanting to be given a chance. And so, yeah, Flores, I mean, it's a hard road. It's a hard road because there's a lot of power. NFL has a lot of power and influence and legal, standing and all these things. But if nobody does it, then nothing changes. Nothing changes. And there was a whole wave of hiring, by the way, after that. Oh, we better hire some people. So, so I do think that, you're trying to change things, and change is hard. It takes time. I mean, I have many incidents where I wrote about things that I went through, and some took 2 years to resolve. And sometimes I look back, it's like, I wish I spent those 2 years doing something else, but I don't regret it. I just think about how much time it takes to make change and make sure everyone is included.
Yeah, one of the things that you said about Jackie was you mentioned a quote from him, which was, if you want to have the power to change, you must be a decision maker in hiring and corporate policy. Could anything be more true today when you're dealing not only with the outside world, but with sports? Is that we need to have more ownership that looks like society in order to have change?
For so many reasons, even the fundamental reason, let's just all be baseball fans here. Don't we want the game to be represented by everyone, everywhere? Of course. I mean, that's great for the game. That's great. I don't care where you're coming from. I want fans because I love this game. So even at the fundamental level, we just want that opportunity to look around and say, wow, this is America. This is a beautiful tapestry of opportunity and change and stories of people going through wars to get here. All these things that have been part of what built America. So I think on that level, it's more tangible as just a fan of the game. And representation does matter. And I think of Jackie Robinson, that's an American story that's inspiring. Of course, Black America relates in a direct way, but it's truly cuts through all that, because you say America, you think about land of the free, and you want to fight for these opportunities. And this is someone who did that, right? He said, no, I care about this country and what it looks like on the other side of my life. That's a beautiful story. So absolutely that, we think about hiring in baseball, the Selig rules and Rooney rules and all these things. And you realize that it's hard to push up against the homogeneity, right? Everybody in the boardroom, when everybody kind of thinks the same, you get the same outcome. It's like, oh, I'm gonna hire my friends and people who had my experience. It may not be like directly, like consciously, oh, they have to be white or they have to be X. But I think that's just a natural thing that starts to happen when you have power, and you just reinforce your own power to justify why you're in the position you're in. And it just keeps going. And until and that's why you want other people in the room to have other experiences, because first of all, it not only diversifies the room and the audience and all these things, but it diversifies thought, the process of being open to, oh, I can mentor and coach this way because someone has this whole different experience. You can't be afraid of that. It makes you better. It exposes you to different ways. And that's what I loved about baseball, going to spring training every year and being like, oh wow, people are from all over the place and we get to celebrate this together. I've learned so much from all kinds of players, and I think that's could be great for larger society as well.
Well, we in our audience continue to learn so much from you, and we can't thank you enough for the trust you put in us to have these conversations and the time you give us. We will keep looking out for what you're doing. We will enjoy celebrating Jackie Robinson Day and look for your coverage of the game, and look forward to the next time we get you back to talk about this all more. Thanks so much for the time, Doug.
Absolutely. Thank you.